This is the story of Justin Bieber, the prodigy who rose too fast, the boy who stepped into Sean Diddy Combs' shadow, and the man who may still be haunted by that choice. Because fame isn't free, and sometimes the price of success is darker than anyone dares to admit. The first encounter. Diddy was no stranger to controversy. By the time Justin Bieber's star rose, Diddy had already been a kingmaker for decades, creating stars, building an empire of wealth, and shrouding himself in rumors of wild parties, violence, and darker secrets. When Bieber first crossed paths with him, the public saw a mentor-mentee relationship. The narrative was simple: an industry titan guiding a rising star, but the details unsettled people. In one now infamous interview, Diddy spoke about Justin in a way that fans later replayed with suspicion. He said he wanted to spend 48 hours straight with Justin, without explaining what that meant. To many at the time, it sounded like harmless banter, an older artist joking about mentoring a younger one. But as years passed, and as allegations against Diddy piled up, those words began to feel different. Soon, photos began circulating online. Justin, only 15, was seen beside Diddy at clubs, events, and private gatherings. The boy from Stratford was no longer just a singer. He was in the inner circle of one of the most powerful, most feared men in hip-hop. And for some, that was the first red flag, a seed of darkness. Looking back, fans would point to these early encounters as the start of Justin's unraveling, the point where the innocence began to erode. Yes, he was famous. Yes, he was adored. But the world he was entering wasn't built for children. It was built for men like Diddy, men who thrived in excess, who treated people as pawns, and who blurred the lines between mentorship and manipulation. For Justin, it was intoxicating. Fast cars, luxury gifts, VIP access. For the world, it was suspicious, because behind every gift is a price, and behind every smile in the industry, there's a shadow lurking just out of sight. By the end of 2009, Justin Bieber was the most famous teenager alive. His songs topped charts, his face covered magazines, and his every move was broadcast to millions. But in the shadows of his rise stood Sean Combs, watching, guiding, pulling him deeper into a world Justin barely understood. The boy idol had been crowned, but the cost of that crown was only beginning to reveal itself. Because in Hollywood, mentorship can sometimes look a lot like possession. And in the years to come, Justin Bieber would discover that fame is never free. The price of admission. At 15, most kids are worrying about homework or crushes, but Bieber was navigating contracts, managers, and mentors who were decades older than him. The people guiding him weren't interested in protecting innocence. They were interested in power. And Diddy? He was the gatekeeper. In Hollywood and the music industry, access is everything. Parties, clubs, secret gatherings. That's where the deals are made. That's where alliances are formed. That's where careers are either accelerated or quietly destroyed. For Justin, being seen with Diddy wasn't just about mentorship. It was about being baptized into a system where silence and obedience were currency. And with every photo snapped at a private gathering, with every late-night hangout, the whispers grew louder. The parties nobody talks about. The legend of Diddy's parties is infamous. Mansions filled with celebrities, alcohol flowing like rivers, music pounding until dawn. But beneath the surface, people said there was more. Activities so wild, so reckless, that even Hollywood insiders shuddered to describe them. Phones were banned, cameras confiscated. Whatever happened in those rooms stayed there. And yet fragments of stories leaked out. Guests spoke in coded language. Rumors spread online. Allegations, unverified but persistent, painted a picture of a man whose world was built on control, manipulation, and secrecy. And into that world walked Justin Bieber, still just a teenager, still wide-eyed, still too young to fully grasp what he was being pulled into. The 48 hours that wouldn't die. Years later, a clip of Diddy surfaced online. Him joking, half serious, about wanting to spend 48 hours straight with Justin Bieber. At the time, people laughed. They thought it was weird, yes, but harmless. A mentor bragging about time with his protege. But as lawsuits against Diddy piled up in later years, lawsuits alleging sexual assault, coercion, and abuse, that old clip resurfaced. Suddenly, the joke didn't feel funny anymore. It felt like a clue, a fragment of something darker, something hidden in plain sight. And fans began to ask, what really happened during those 48 hours? The uneasy laughter. In interview after interview, Justin smiled nervously when Diddy's name came up. He laughed along when Diddy made suggestive comments. He never openly complained. But people who re-watched those clips years later noticed the same thing. The unease in Justin's eyes, the forced laughter, the tension in his shoulders. Was it just the awkwardness of a teenager sitting next to a powerful man? Or was it the silence of someone who knew better than to speak? Because in Hollywood, speaking out comes with consequences. And for a teenager with a career still hanging by the threads of powerful men, silence might have been the only option. Rumors that wouldn't go away. The internet has a long memory. By the mid-2000s, as Bieber's career began to falter under the weight of arrests, public meltdowns, and substance abuse, fans started connecting dots. They looked back at the Diddy years, at the gifts, the parties, the strange interviews. They replayed the clips, zoomed into the photos, dissected every word. On forums and YouTube videos, across Twitter threads, the whispers grew into theories. Some believed Bieber had seen things he shouldn't have. Others believed he had been pulled into something darker, something that scarred him deeply. The truth? Nobody could prove anything, but the whispers refused to die. The industry's open secret. In the music industry, silence isn't just protection, it's survival. Everyone knew about Diddy's reputation, the lawsuits, the violent altercations, the rumors of exploitation. Yet he remained untouchable for decades. Why? Because he was too powerful, because too many people owed him favors, because too many careers were tied to his name. And for Justin Bieber, being linked to Diddy wasn't just about friendship, it was about being marked, forever tied to a man whose empire was built on whispers. The industry saw it, the fans sensed it, and as the years passed, the question only grew louder. What did Justin endure in those early years? The breakdown connection. As Bieber spiraled publicly, drag racing in Miami, clashing with paparazzi, breaking down on stage, fans began to wonder if these weren't just the antics of a spoiled pop star. What if they were symptoms? What if the breakdowns were the echoes of trauma? In documentaries, Justin spoke vaguely about depression, about struggles, about feeling trapped. He never named names, he never pointed fingers. But every time Diddy's scandals surfaced, fans couldn't help but look back at Justin and wonder, had the whispers been true all along? The silence that spoke volumes. Justin Bieber never publicly accused Diddy of anything. But silence itself is a story. Sometimes it's louder than words. Why never distance himself? Why never address the speculation? Why never put the rumors to rest? Theories vary. Some say he was scared. Others say he was silenced. Some believe NDAS were involved, binding him legally from speaking out. Whatever the truth, Bieber's silence only fueled the fire. Because when someone never denies, never explains, never clarifies, the whispers only grow louder. Every star burns bright before it burns out. But some stars don't simply fade. They collapse. They implode. They tear themselves apart under the weight of their own light. For Justin Bieber, the years after his teenage rise were supposed to be the glory years. Sold-out stadiums, platinum records, and global domination. And on paper, that's exactly what he had. But behind the curtain, something else was happening. Something darker. Something that looked less like success and more like self-destruction. And for those who remembered his early days with Diddy, the spiral felt less like coincidence and more like consequence. The golden boy cracks. In 2013, Justin Bieber was at the height of his fame. Every move he made was broadcast across the world. He had money, power, and millions of adoring fans. But the cracks were showing. The once boyish charm was fading into arrogance. The wide-eyed smile was replaced with a cold glare. The headlines shifted from pop's brightest star to Bieber's bad behavior. It started small. Late-night parties, paparazzi scuffles, reckless spending. But soon it became impossible to ignore. Justin wasn't just acting out, he was spiraling. The night of January 23, 2014, became a symbol of Justin's fall. Miami police pulled over a yellow Lamborghini, Justin's car of choice, eerily reminiscent of the one Diddy had gifted him years before. Behind the wheel was the pop star himself, intoxicated, drag racing down the streets at nearly 60 miles per hour in a 30 zone. The mugshot went viral. His boy next door image was shattered. Fans were devastated. Critics pounced. But for those who looked deeper, the image was haunting. Because that mugshot wasn't just a celebrity caught breaking the law. It was the face of a kid who had grown up too fast, surrounded by men like Diddy, who taught him that recklessness was a way of life. The egging incident. Weeks later, Bieber was in the news again, this time for egging a neighbor's house in Los Angeles, causing thousands of dollars in damage. It sounded juvenile, almost laughable, but the response was deadly serious. Police raided his mansion. They found drugs. They found an entourage of enablers. They found a young man surrounded by chaos. It was a moment that revealed the truth. Justin Bieber wasn't in control anymore. He was living in a world where consequences didn't exist, where excess was encouraged, where silence was mandatory. The same world Diddy had ushered him into years earlier. The paparazzi war. By 2013 and 2014, Justin's relationship with the media had become a battle. He lashed out at photographers. He stormed off red carpets. He cursed out interviewers. The smile was gone. The innocence was dead. And in its place was anger, frustration, pain. Fans began asking, where did this anger come from? Some said it was the pressure of fame. Others believed it was the weight of secrets. Things he had seen, things he couldn't say, things he had been forced to endure, because silence corrodes the soul. And Justin was living proof. The addiction shadow. As the spiral continued, so did the whispers of drug use. Weed, lean, pills. Bieber himself later admitted to abusing substances to escape the pressures of his life. He confessed he would wake up and smoke, drink, pop something, anything to numb the pain. But the question that haunted fans wasn't just what he was using, but why? Why would a young man with everything, fame, fortune, adoration, want to escape his own life so badly? Theories pointed back to his early years, to the world Diddy had pulled him into, to the parties where silence was demanded, to the shadows that had followed him ever since. The lonely prison. By his early 20s, Justin Bieber was one of the most famous people alive, yet he was also one of the loneliest. He admitted in interviews that he felt like a product, like a puppet being paraded around for profit. He said he couldn't trust anyone. He felt watched, controlled, suffocated, and loneliness can drive a person mad. The same boy who once dreamed of singing on a street corner now dreamed of escape. He shaved his head. He lashed out at fans. He canceled shows. It wasn't rebellion, it was desperation. The connection to Diddy. As Bieber's spiral dominated headlines, people started drawing lines back to Diddy. They remembered the Lamborghini gift. They remembered the 48-hour comments. They remembered the parties, the photos, the uneasy interviews. And they began to ask, was this the cost of Diddy's mentorship? Because Justin wasn't the only young star to struggle after entering that circle. Others had burned out. Others had vanished. The difference was that Justin was too famous to disappear quietly. His downfall was public. His suffering was visible. His spiral was broadcast in real time. The industry silence. Here's the most chilling part. As Justin fell apart in front of the world, the industry stayed silent. His mentors didn't step in. His peers didn't intervene. His so-called protectors looked the other way. And in that silence, fans heard something loud. Complicity. Because in Hollywood, silence isn't neutral. It's a shield. It's protection. It's survival. And for Justin Bieber, that silence meant he was alone in his spiral, alone with the weight of secrets he couldn't speak. The Purpose Era. In 2015, Justin released Purpose. It was supposed to be his redemption arc, an album that would prove he had matured, that he could rise from the ashes of his scandals. And in many ways, it worked. Sorry, what do you mean? Love Yourself. These songs dominated charts and rebuilt his image. But listen closely to the lyrics, and you hear something else. Regret, exhaustion, pain. A young man desperately trying to apologize to the world without ever saying what for. Fans loved the music, but behind the curtain, Justin was still crumbling. The on-stage meltdown. During the Purpose tour, cracks began to show. On stage, Justin often looked disconnected, almost robotic. He cut songs short. He walked off mid-performance. He scolded fans for screaming too loudly. This wasn't rebellion anymore. This was burnout. And then suddenly, he canceled the remainder of his tour. Hundreds of shows, millions of dollars, gone. The official statement cited exhaustion, but whispers spread quickly. Some said he'd checked into therapy. Others claimed rehab. Some whispered of deeper secrets, breakdowns triggered by things he could never speak of publicly. The silence only deepened the mystery. The haunted interviews. Around this time, Justin began giving interviews that felt unsettling. He spoke openly about depression, about how fame had destroyed his sense of self, about how he often didn't want to get out of bed. In one documentary, he confessed that he felt constantly followed and watched. He described nights where he couldn't escape the shadows of his own mind. He never named names, never pointed fingers. But to those who remembered his early years with Diddy, the puzzle pieces seemed to align. What if his torment wasn't just the weight of fame? What if it was the weight of secrets? The marriage escape. In 2018, Justin married Hailey Baldwin. To the world, it looked like a love story, but some saw it as something else, a lifeline. Marriage gave Justin stability, structure, a shield against the chaos of his past. Yet even in his marriage, shadows followed. Trolls flooded Hailey with hate. Rumors swirled that Justin wasn't faithful, that he wasn't truly happy, that ghosts from his past still haunted his present. And woven through the online speculation was the same name that refused to disappear: Diddy. Because every time new allegations against Diddy surfaced, fans circled back to Justin. What had he seen? What had he endured? And was he still carrying those scars into his marriage? The lawsuits against Diddy. By the early 2020s, lawsuits against Diddy began to pile up. Allegations of sexual assault, coercion, and exploitation came pouring in from multiple women. Suddenly, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were testimonies, and the internet did what it always does. It began to connect the dots. Old interviews resurfaced. Old photos of Bieber and Diddy were dragged back into the spotlight. The 48 hours clip spread like wildfire once again. It was as if the world was finally catching up to what fans had feared for years. And in that firestorm, Bieber's silence became deafening. The tattoos and the symbols fans began to analyze Justin's every move, every lyric, every tattoo. They noticed his cross tattoos, his references to demons, his obsession with redemption. Some said he was crying out in code, expressing his trauma through ink and music. One fan theory suggested that Justin's religious rebirth, his newfound devotion to Christianity, wasn't just about faith, but about escape. That he had turned to God because no earthly power could save him from what he had endured in the industry. And looming in the background of those theories was the same ghostly presence: Diddy. The ghost of Diddy. Ghosts don't always come with chains and screams. Sometimes they come as memories, as rumors, as shadows that follow you no matter how far you run. For Justin Bieber, that ghost had a name: Diddy. Even when Justin tried to rebuild, even when he tried to bury the past under faith, marriage, and music, the ghost lingered. Because ghosts never disappear when the story isn't finished. And Diddy's story was only just beginning to unravel. The collapse of a mogul. For decades, Sean "Diddy" Combs had stood untouchable. Every scandal slid off his shoulders. Every rumor dissolved into the ether. He was too powerful, too connected, too rich to fall. But power built on shadows can't last forever. By the 2020s, lawsuits began to crush him. Women stepped forward, their voices breaking the silence that had once protected him. Allegations of abuse, assault, and manipulation tore through the industry. Then came the raids. Federal agents stormed his mansions. Images of Diddy in handcuffs, of evidence bags being carried out, dominated the news cycle. The untouchable mogul had finally been touched. And as the empire cracked, the ghost of Diddy began to haunt not just himself, but everyone who had once stood in his orbit, including Justin Bieber. The resurfaced footage, old clips, flooded the internet like curses returning to claim their victims. The 48 hours joke, the Lamborghini gift. The awkward interviews where Justin forced a smile as Diddy wrapped an arm around him. In isolation, they seemed odd. But in context, after the lawsuits, after the raids, after the testimonies, they seemed sinister. The internet didn't forget, and now it refused to forgive. Comment sections filled with the same haunting questions. Did Diddy hurt Justin? Was Justin a victim too? Is that why he spiraled so young, so violently, so publicly? The ghost in the music fans began to hear Diddy's shadow in Justin's songs. Lyrics about demons, lyrics about shame, lyrics about feeling trapped, controlled, broken. Songs like Lonely hit harder in retrospect. Everybody knows my name now, but something about it still feels strange. It wasn't just the loneliness of fame, it was the loneliness of silence. The kind that eats you alive because the truth is too dangerous to speak. And every lyric felt like another haunting, another whisper of what had happened in those years that nobody dared to discuss openly. The fear of speaking. Why didn't Justin say something? That's the question that cut deepest. If Diddy was guilty of so much, if the rumors had even a grain of truth, why not expose him? Why not add his voice to the chorus of accusers? The answer may be simple. Fear. Fear of retaliation. Fear of contracts and legal power. Fear of losing everything he'd worked for. Or maybe it wasn't fear at all. Maybe it was survival. Maybe silence was the only thing that kept him alive in an industry where speaking out has buried countless careers. Either way, the result was the same. Diddy's ghost still owned a piece of Justin's silence. The internet detectives, in the age of social media, no secret stays buried. Fans became detectives. They dissected timelines, dug through interviews, compared photos. They mapped out connections between Bieber's breakdowns and Diddy's mentorship. They noticed how Justin always distanced himself just enough to avoid suspicion, yet never severed the tie completely. Some claimed there were NDNAS. Others said Diddy's network of influence was too dangerous to cross. Some believed Justin had tried to speak in symbols, in code, in music. Whatever the truth, the theories only grew stronger as Diddy's empire collapsed. The ghost in Justin's eyes. Sometimes you don't need words. Sometimes the truth hides in a look. In documentaries, Justin often looked tired, haunted. His eyes carried the weight of someone much older. When interviewers asked about his youth, his smile faltered. When questions turned to fame, he grew tense. And when clips of Diddy resurfaced, fans studied Justin's reactions, or rather the absence of them. The silence, the refusal to engage. It was as if even acknowledging the ghost gave it more power. As if Justin was still afraid of the chains that came with Diddy's name. The parallel spirals. As Diddy's empire burned, Justin's silence looked less like coincidence and more like parallel fates. Both had built careers on spectacle. Both had been surrounded by whispers. Both carried shadows that wouldn't die. The difference was that Diddy's shadows had finally caught up to him. Justin's? They still lingered in silence like ghosts refusing to let go. The ghosts that wouldn't leave. Even as Justin tried to move forward, with faith, with Haley, with new music, the ghost followed. Every article about Diddy dragged Justin's name back into the headlines. Every lawsuit resurfaced the old clips. Every raid reignited the questions. Justin could release the most joyful, innocent song in the world, and still beneath it, fans heard the ghost. Because when a story isn't finished, The ghost doesn't disappear. It waits, it lingers, it haunts. Chapter 7. Silence and Survival. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is survival. For Justin Bieber, silence has been both a cage and a shield. It has suffocated him, but it has also kept him breathing. And in the story of Diddy, in the shadow of an empire collapsing, Justin's silence may be the loudest sound of all. The burden of a prodigy. Justin never asked to be the voice of a generation. He never asked for arenas packed with screaming fans, or cameras documenting his every move, or headlines twisting every mistake into scandal. He was a boy with a voice, discovered on YouTube, thrust into a machine that ate children and spat out adults with scars. By the time he was 16, he wasn't just famous, he was a brand, a product, a currency. And behind every product is a contract. Behind every contract is control. When Diddy entered Justin's life, it was under the guise of mentorship, a promise of guidance, a glimpse of what power could look like. But power has a price, and the price of entering Diddy's orbit was steep. The predator and the prodigy. Looking back, the contrast is chilling. Diddy, the seasoned mogul. Justin, the wide-eyed teenager. The clips tell a story on their own. Diddy's arm draped over Justin's shoulder, the jokes about 48 hours, the half-smile frozen on Justin's face. At the time, fans laughed it off. It was playful, harmless, a joke. But hindsight is a cruel mirror. In the wake of lawsuits, raids, and testimonies, those same clips now look like evidence. Evidence of grooming, of manipulation, of something darker lurking beneath the surface. And even if nothing happened, even if it was only optics, only innuendo, the power dynamic itself was enough to leave scars. Because predators don't always need to act. Sometimes the fear they inspire is enough to control. The spiral as a symptom. For years, Justin's spiral seemed like the story of another spoiled celebrity. The arrests, the drugs, the reckless behavior. But what if it wasn't? What if the spiral was a symptom, not the disease? What if the chaos was the only way he knew how to scream when silence was safer than words? The internet reframed everything. The Lamborghini, the breakdowns, the lyrics about demons, not as random misbehavior, but as survival responses, as coping mechanisms, as the echo of a ghost that never stopped haunting. The silence that speaks. Why hasn't Justin said more? Why, in a world where victims are finding their voices, has he kept his so tightly sealed? Maybe he signed an NDA, maybe the contracts were unbreakable, maybe the risk of retaliation, legal, financial, even physical, was too great. Or maybe the truth is simpler. Justin doesn't want to reopen those wounds. Some survivors never tell their story, not because it didn't happen, but because living through it once was already too much. Silence can be surrender, but silence can also be power. It can be a refusal to let the abuser control the narrative. In that sense, Justin's silence may be the truest act of rebellion. The empire in ashes. Diddy's empire has finally begun to collapse. The lawsuits multiply. The raids intensify. The whispers are now headlines. The world watches the fall of a man who once seemed invincible. And in the ashes of that empire, a question remains. What about Justin? Because if even half the rumors are true, he wasn't just another pop star in Diddy's orbit. He was a child pulled into a world too dark, too dangerous, too destructive. And the scars of that world are still visible in the man he became, the fans as witnesses. In a strange twist, it isn't the industry that has protected Justin. It isn't the managers, the lawyers, the executives. It's the fans. The millions of people who noticed the haunted look in his eyes, who connected the dots, who kept asking questions even when the media stayed silent. It was fans who kept the ghost alive. Fans who refused to forget the footage. Fans who saw through the smiles. And maybe one day, it will be fans who finally force the truth into the light. Survival, not closure. There may never be a confession. There may never be a tell-all interview or lawsuit with Justin's name on it. That's the nature of survival. It isn't about closure, it's about endurance. Justin has endured through addiction, through public humiliation, through the crushing weight of secrets too heavy to name. And in that endurance, there is strength, because survival itself is defiance. The unfinished story. So where does this leave us? With a pop star who was once a boy, with a mogul whose empire is falling, with a ghost that still haunts both of their names. The story of Diddy and Justin Bieber may never be fully told. The truth may remain locked behind contracts, trauma, and silence. But the silence itself tells us enough, because sometimes the loudest stories are the ones never spoken aloud. The final haunting, Diddy's empire crumbles. Justin moves on. The world speculates. But at night, when the cameras fade and the crowds disappear, Justin is left with the same ghost. A ghost that shaped his childhood. A ghost that scarred his rise. A ghost that the world can no longer ignore. And until the truth is spoken, that ghost will linger. Not just in Justin's story, not just in Diddy's downfall, but in the industry itself. An industry built on silence, survival, and shadows. Because some ghosts don't fade, they wait. And the ghost of Diddy may be waiting still. And that is the haunting truth. Justin's silence, Diddy's downfall, and the questions that may never be answered. But what do you think? Was Bieber another victim of the industry shadows? Or is the truth still buried deeper than we know? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories that pull back the curtain on fame, power, and the darkness behind the spotlight, make sure to subscribe to Thriller X, where the truth is always darker than fiction. Until next time, stay curious and stay in the shadows.